Jurgen Klopp is Germany's new head coach. The job comes with a broken team behind him. In a round of 32 exit at the World Cup, 6 players who were fixtures under Julian Nagelsmann now find their place in the shirt uncertain. Because Klopp wants a different Germany built his way. Jurgen Klopp arriving as Germany's head coach puts 6 stars in danger. And here's how that story starts. Let's start with what actually happened because it moved fast. Germany crashed out of the 2026 World Cup in the round of 32. Beaten by Paraguay on penalties after a 1-1 draw through normal and extra time. Germany faced Paraguay in the World Cup round of 32. And with regular and extra time ending in a 1-1 draw, Paraguay won the penalty shootout to send Germany home early. That result triggered an inquest inside German football. The appointment came following an inquest after Germany's exit in the round of 32 at the World Cup to Paraguay, resulting in Julian Nagelsmann stepping down from his role as national team head coach. The DFB didn't waste time hunting for a replacement. Following Nagelsmann's departure, the DFB moved quickly to open negotiations with former Borussia Dortmund and Liverpool head coach Klopp, who was working as a pundit for Magenta TV in North America alongside his role as Red Bull's head of global soccer. Talks didn't stay quiet for long. Initial talks between DFB President Bernd Neuendorf, Vice President Hans-Joachim Watzke, and Klopp took place in New York during the World Cup. Those conversations turned into a deal, though there was a wrinkle. Klopp was still under contract with Red Bull. Those discussions resulted in an agreement on the key terms of a contract. Although negotiations also required cooperation from Red Bull, Klopp's employer at the time. And the DFB later reached an agreement with Red Bull that allowed Klopp to leave his executive role. Instead of a straight cash payout, Bild reported that the DFB would not pay Red Bull a compensation fee to release Klopp from his contract, and would instead donate €1 million to Wings for Life. The contract itself is long. The 59-year-old signed an initial 4-year contract, beginning on 15 August 2026 and running through to 2030. Taking over following Germany's shock round of 32 exit to Paraguay at the World Cup and Nagelsmann's subsequent departure. Klopp himself framed the job in emotional terms rather than tactical ones, saying the national team can unite Germans like nothing else, and that's what makes the role special to him. While adding he wants to approach it with humility and patience, building a team that fights for each other. DFB President Neuendorf didn't hide how much they wanted him, saying Klopp embodies passion, credibility, and the ability to inspire people, and that he was their first choice for the role. Sporting director Rudi Völler backed that up too, pointing to years of developing young players and getting teams to perform under pressure. Here's the part that matters for 6 players sweating their futures right now. Klopp isn't walking into a settled, winning setup. He takes over a Germany side still searching for its first major trophy. Since winning the 2014 World Cup, having suffered early exits at the 2018, 2022, and 2026 tournaments. 3 straight tournament disappointments. That's the mandate, not tinkering, but revival. And revival means somebody's spot gets questioned. Klopp doesn't get a leisurely runway either. He officially takes up his new role on 15 August, then has a little over a month before his first game in charge, against the Netherlands in Amsterdam on 24 September in the first game of the Nations League, with a full-on start to life as 3 more fixtures get squeezed into the extended international break. Against Greece in Augsburg for his home debut, then Serbia and Munich, and finally away in Greece. 4 games in a matter of weeks. No time to ease anyone in gently. Decisions on personnel start almost immediately. And this is where the 6 names start to surface, even in the early reporting around his unveiling. Outlets were already flagging exactly the kind of calls Klopp faces. Klopp will have to decide whether Joshua Kimmich should remain as captain, and who will replace veteran goalkeeper Manuel Neuer following his retirement from international football, while also needing to work out what to do with older players such as Antonio Rudiger and Leon Goretzka, all while finding opportunities for younger players looking to break into the side. That's 4 names right there in one report. Kimmich, Neuer's old jersey, Rudiger, Goretzka. It doesn't stop with the back line and the captaincy. Even before Klopp had the job confirmed, he was already publicly nudging Nagelsmann toward difficult decisions about the squad's most decorated names. At one point, wading into the debate around whether the golden boy of German wingers should even keep his place. And pundits close to the German setup have gone even further, naming names on who they think should be phased out entirely as Klopp starts his rebuild. One prominent voice put it plainly: I believe that Joshua Kimmich, Leon Goretzka, and Leroy Sane should no longer play a role in the national team. So within days of Klopp's appointment being made official, the shape of this story was already visible. A goalkeeper position with no clear owner after a legend's exit, a captaincy in question, two veteran midfielders whose international futures are being debated in public, and a winger whose World Cup was branded a disaster by his own country's press. German media said Sane was quickly made the scapegoat in his home country. And while the problem was least about him, Sane was perfectly suited to become the symbol of a performance principle that had ceased to function. 6 players, 1 new coach with a 4-year mandate to build something Germany hasn't had since 2014, a team that wins. Everything from here is about how each of those 6 names got into this position, and what Klopp's arrival actually threatens to do to their place in the shirt. Start with the man wearing the armband, because no decision Klopp makes will be scrutinized more than what he does with Joshua Kimmich. Kimmich has been one of the most reliable names in a German shirt for the better part of a decade. A player who can dictate matches from deep or work box to box, someone previous coaches have trusted to marshal midfield. That trust was still there heading into the World Cup. Joshua Kimmich captained the side, with Antonio Rudiger serving as vice-captain, and Serge Gnabry missing out through injury as the biggest omission from a 26-man group built to win for the first time since 2014. Germany went to North America as a 4-time champion, still sitting at the top of that captaincy hierarchy. Then came Paraguay, and everything about that tournament got reassessed, including Kimmich's place at the very top of it. The same matchday breakdown that flagged Sané's struggles down the flank also zeroed in on how Kimmich's role in the system contributed to the collapse. It was an asymmetrical 4-2-3-1 with Joshua Kimmich inverting to create a pseudo back 3, while Nathaniel Brown tucked inside as an extra wide midfielder. The whole shape simply didn't work, and Kimmich's inverted role was part of the machinery that broke down that day. By the time the post-mortem got underway, respected voices in German football weren't just questioning Kimmich's tactical role, they were questioning whether he belonged in the setup at all going forward. That's the same voice from earlier who bundled Kimmich in with Goretzka and Sane as players who should no longer play a role for the national team. When a player wearing the captain's armband is being lumped in with veterans being nudged toward the exit, that's not a small storyline. That's a seismic one for German football, and it isn't just outside voices raising it. The earliest reporting on Klopp's unveiling made clear this wasn't speculation dreamed up by pundits chasing headlines. It's literally one of the first calls on Klopp's desk. Klopp will have to decide whether Joshua Kimmich should remain as captain, and who will replace veteran goalkeeper Manuel Neuer following his retirement from international football. Of everything on Klopp's plate in his first weeks, a Nations League opener in Amsterdam, a home debut in Augsburg, games against Serbia and Greece squeezed into one window, the captaincy question sits right at the top of the list alongside the goalkeeper puzzle. Why does this matter so much? Because captaincy in the German setup has never been a symbolic formality. It's gone through public tussles before, the wrangling between Neuer and Ter Stegen over the gloves, the debate over whether Ilkay Gundogan's word would carry the same weight as Neuer's inside the dressing room. Handing Kimmich the armband was itself a declaration about who Nagelsmann trusted to be the emotional and tactical center of the group. Taking it away, or even opening the door to taking it away, is Klopp signaling that revival starts with structure, not sentiment. There's also the matter of style. Klopp's whole coaching identity was forged on relentless pressing, full-throttle transitions, players who can both defend space aggressively and drive forward through midfield. Kimmich has never lacked engine or intelligence, but the deep, quarterback-style read he offers under a possession-first setup isn't automatically the same profile Klopp leans on elsewhere. If Klopp wants a pivot that presses higher, moves quicker, and doesn't need to drop into a back 3 to solve structural problems, then the very role Kimmich has occupied for years is exactly the kind of thing a new manager questions on day 1. None of this means Kimmich is finished. He remains one of the most capped, most decorated players in the squad, and DFB sporting director Verler's own words about Klopp's history praised precisely the kind of manager who develops players and gets performances under pressure. That's a coach who could just as easily double down on his captain as strip him of the armband. But that uncertainty itself is the story. A player who walked into the World Cup as undisputed captain is walking out of it with commentators openly discussing whether he should be phased out entirely, and a new head coach who has been explicitly told that deciding Kimmich's captaincy is one of his first jobs. That's one name, star number one, sitting in the crosshairs of a rebuild that hasn't even had its first training session yet. And he's not walking into this uncertainty alone, because right alongside him is a winger whose World Cup went from disappointing to symbolic of everything that went wrong. If Kimmich's situation is about structure and leadership, Leroy Sané's is about form, age, and a manager who was publicly skeptical of him before he even had the job. Sane went into the World Cup as one of Germany's most experienced attacking players, but the tournament turned into a nightmare for him specifically. In the round of 32 defeat to Paraguay, he was deployed as essentially the only outlet on one side of the pitch. And it didn't work. Sane played as the sole source of width on the right for much of the game. Unable to beat his man or land a successful cross, and being a black hole in possession meant Paraguay could comfortably focus efforts elsewhere. A winger whose entire value is built on beating defenders and putting balls into dangerous areas simply didn't show up when it mattered most. The German press didn't go easy on him afterward either. He became, in the words of the domestic coverage, the face of everything that had stopped functioning for the national team, even though the issues ran deeper than one player. That's a brutal position to be in, not just criticized for a bad night, but turned into the symbol for the entire tournament's collapse. Now bring Klopp into this. Long before he was officially in the building, Klopp was already weighing in publicly on personnel questions. And Sané's positioning has been part of that conversation. In his time working as a pundit, Klopp opened a debate by suggesting Nagelsmann ought to consider dropping the biggest name in German football at the time, before walking it back somewhat and insisting it wasn't meant as criticism. That's not nothing. It's a preview of a coach willing to say the uncomfortable thing about a star name in public, even before he had any say over the squad. Beyond Sané himself, evaluations of Germany's wider winger pool have been blunt about the direction of travel. One assessment of the squad Klopp inherits put it directly, with the wingers available to Klopp. Sané is looking past his best, opening the door for other names to be considered instead. That's not a stray opinion buried in a comments section. It's the framing multiple outlets have landed on independently since Klopp's appointment became official. His club situation hasn't helped calm any of that speculation either. Sané had already left Bayern Munich for Galatasaray, a move that shifted scrutiny onto whether he was playing at the level required to hold down a national team spot. Even under Nagelsmann, he was left out of a squad and told directly that he needed to stand out more given the perceived gap in competition level between the Bundesliga and his new league. He responded at the time by insisting there was no issue between himself and the coach and that he just needed to find his rhythm. But that kind of public prodding from a manager, followed by an early World Cup exit, where he was singled out as the symbol of collapse, is not the platform from which a player enters a new coach's plans with confidence. And it isn't just Sané facing that particular squeeze. The broader picture around Germany's wide options paints an even starker generational shift. One breakdown of the squad going forward suggested Sané's international days are numbered, full stop, while pointing to alternatives waiting for their opportunity. Younger, sharper, hungrier players who represent exactly the profile Klopp has built his reputation on. Think of it as the same dynamic that played out at Liverpool years ago, when younger legs and higher pressing intensity started to win out over experience and reputation alone. Put Sane and Kimmich side by side and a pattern starts to form. Both walked into the World Cup as trusted senior figures. Both come out of it with their long-term futures under active public debate. Both have been directly named by pundits pushing for a clean break as Klopp starts his rebuild. And in Sané's case specifically, the coach doing the rebuilding is a man who was already questioning his inclusion before he ever had the authority to do anything about it. That's two stars now facing uncertainty under the new regime, the captain and the winger. But this rebuild doesn't stop at the midfield and the flanks. It reaches all the way back into defense, where two more of Nagelsmann's most trusted veterans are staring down exactly the same kind of question. How much longer do they have left in this shirt? Antonio Rudiger and Leon Goretzka represent a different kind of risk than Kimmich or Sané. This isn't about a bad tournament or a tactical mismatch. It's about age and a rebuild that has to eventually stop leaning on players who won't be around for the next World Cup cycle. Start with Rudiger. He didn't actually have a poor World Cup. By most accounts, he played well, even carrying Germany's defensive line as vice-captain. Rudiger is Germany's defensive anchor and vice-captain, and the Real Madrid center-back. Brings Champions League winning experience and an aggressive, dominant style at the back. having missed qualifying time through injury but forced his way into the final 26. That's not the profile of a player being dropped for underperforming. It's the profile of a player whose age is now working against him, regardless of form. That's exactly how one assessment of Germany's roster framed his situation after the tournament. The 33-year-old is described as being at a natural breaking-off point for the Real Madrid veteran, who actually played well at the World Cup with the transition to new players. On the backline needing to begin, and the temptation to lean on Rudiger something that should be avoided. That's about as direct a warning as you'll find a player performing at a high level, but one whose continued presence risks slowing down exactly the kind of generational reset. Klopp has been brought in to deliver. Then there's Goretzka, whose situation is more precarious still. He wasn't even part of the World Cup squad that traveled to North America, having already been left out of Nagelsmann's plans before the tournament even started. And the earliest reporting on Klopp's job made clear that figuring out what to do with older players like Goretzka is one of his first tasks in the building. That puts Goretzka in a genuinely uncomfortable spot, not fighting to keep a place he already has, but fighting to get back into a squad that moved past him under the previous coach, now under a new coach whose entire brief is to build something fresher. The pundit assessment naming Kimmich and Sane alongside a call for cleaning house didn't spare Goretzka either. He was the third name on that same list, with the suggestion he should no longer play a role in the national team going forward. When you're being publicly written out of a rebuild by the very people analyzing the coach, who's about to make these calls, that's about as clear a warning sign as a veteran international can get. Here's what makes both cases sting a bit more than a typical squad reshuffle. These aren't fringe names. Rudiger was Germany's vice-captain at a World Cup. Goretzka has been a Bayern Munich midfielder with Champions League pedigree for the better part of a decade. These are players who, in a normal cycle, would expect to be central to the next set of qualifiers, not fighting simply to remain part of the conversation. And the timing works against them in a very specific way. Klopp isn't inheriting a team in transition over several years. He's inheriting one that just suffered its third straight early tournament exit, with a Nations League opener against the Netherlands arriving within weeks of him taking the job. There's no long runway to ease veterans out gradually while blending in kids alongside them. The pressure to show something different fast is baked into the calendar itself. A coach under that kind of time pressure tends to make faster calls on who fits the identity he's building and who represents the identity he's trying to leave behind. None of this guarantees either player is finished. Rudiger, in particular, is coming off a tournament where he was one of the better performers, in a defense that actually held up reasonably well defensively during qualifying. But the public framing since Klopp's appointment has been consistent and specific. This is where the DFB expects change to start, and these are two of the names, most directly named as being on the wrong side of that line. 4 stars down, the captain, the winger, and now the 2 veterans of the back line, and midfield whose age has turned into their biggest liability. But arguably the most chaotic situation Klopp inherits isn't about any single player's decline. It's about a position with no clear owner at all. The goalkeeper's jersey that just became vacant and the scramble to fill it. If there's one position that sums up just how unsettled this Germany squad is, heading into Klopp's tenure, it's the goalkeeper jersey. And it's the position that gives us our 5th and 6th names. Manuel Neuer's story alone is remarkable. He'd already retired from international football once, only to reverse that decision and come back for one more World Cup at 40 years old. Julian Nagelsmann announced his World Cup squad with one selection dominating every conversation. Manuel Neuer, 40, reversed his 2024 international retirement to compete in his 5th and final World Cup. After Paraguay ended that campaign, Neuer retired again, and this time it looks final. With Germany's exit from the World Cup and the subsequent retirement of Manuel Neuer from international football, a familiar question has once again reared its head. Who will replace the iconic goalkeeper between the sticks? That question doesn't have an obvious answer, and that's exactly what puts 2 more names under threat: Oliver Baumann and Marc-Andre ter Stegen. Before Neuer's late U-turn, Baumann had actually done the job. Oliver Baumann had been heralded as Germany's first-choice goalkeeper for months, and had been a stable pair of hands during qualifying. But Neuer's international retirement U-turn before the tournament threw the situation into doubt once more. Baumann effectively got benched for a legend coming out of retirement, then never really got the reins back. Now, with Neuer gone for good, you'd think Baumann walks straight back into pole position. Except age is working against him too, the same assessments flagging Rudiger's situation. Put Baumann in almost identical territory, describing him as aging out of contention. Just like the veterans on the back line, then there's Ter Stegen, whose story might be the most bittersweet of the six. For years, he played second fiddle to Neuer, and just as that door seemed to be opening, injuries robbed him of the chance. It was horrible timing that Ter Stegen, who spent his entire international career playing second fiddle to Manuel Neuer, suffered horrible luck with injuries. When his time would have finally arrived at the World Cup, he's still spoken of as Germany's most experienced goalkeeper at international level in terms of pedigree and trophies won, but his recent injury record and loss of form at club level have left his standing genuinely uncertain. Something of a forgotten man of late after suffering a string of serious injuries in the last 2 seasons. Ter Stegen is now Germany's most experienced goalkeeper at international level, and should the 34-year-old regain his spot at his club, he may be given another chance with the national team. That's a conditional lifeline, not a guarantee. His path back depends on events entirely outside Klopp's control. What makes the goalkeeping situation different from the other names on this list is that it isn't really about being pushed out by Klopp's preferred style. It's about a legend leaving a genuine vacuum, and neither of the experienced deputies looking like a clean, settled answer. One report summed up the stakes bluntly. Ter Stegen has never managed to truly succeed the German icon, so it is now up to Jurgen Klopp to establish a new undisputed first-choice goalkeeper. And waiting in the wings behind both veterans is a crop of younger keepers. Jonas Erbig chief among them, who represent exactly the kind of long-term project Klopp has spoken about building. So that's 6, the captain whose armband is suddenly a live debate. The winger turned into the symbol of a World Cup collapse. The vice-captain whose form says stay but whose age says go. The recalled or not midfielder already written out of one coach's plans. And now facing a second, and 2 goalkeepers, both experienced, both compromised in their own way. Both standing in the shadow of a legend's actual final retirement. None of these 6 players have been told they're finished. That's not how this works, and it's not what any of the reporting since Klopp's appointment has claimed. What has happened is that every single one of them now walks into international duty with a level of uncertainty they didn't have under Nagelsmann, because the man now picking the squad has a specific brief. Turn a team that suffered 3 straight early tournament exits into one that can finally chase a trophy again. And to do that, he's already been told in plain terms that decisions on the captaincy, the goalkeeper jersey, and what to do with the veterans are among his very first jobs in the building. Klopp's own words at his unveiling suggested he knows exactly how this will be judged. He talked about wanting to build a team that fights for each other, that enjoys playing football, and one the country can get fully behind, but he was equally clear that his approach for now is humility and patience rather than instant upheaval, whether that patience extends to Kimmich's armband, to Sané's place on the wing, to Rudiger and Goretzka's place in the squad, and to whichever goalkeeper finally gets handed the gloves for good, is the story that starts unfolding the moment Klopp takes charge. On the 15th of August, his first test comes fast, away in Amsterdam against the Netherlands, with a home debut in Augsburg and games against Serbia and Greece stacked up right behind it. 4 matches, 1 new coach, and 6 careers hanging in exactly the kind of balance that